Welcome, LA Progressive friends, family, readers. Once again, we being Dick and I, are joined by Bill Blum, who is a former judge and death penalty defense attorney. He's the author of 3 legal thrillers published by Penguin Putnam: Prejudicial Error, The Last Appeal, and The Face of Justice. And he's a contributing writer for the California Lawyer magazine, for Truth Dig, for the Progressive?
Yes.
And LA Progressive.
Right.
So thank you for joining us, Bill.
Always great to be with you.
Yeah. So we wanted to talk about a couple of articles that you've written, that you've graciously allowed us to republish, that were originally published on Truth Dig and the Progressive.
Right.
It's just such an awful time. I want to talk about one of the articles that you wrote, which is about the role that dehumanization plays in supporting what we're seeing play out right now in Gaza and Israel.
Right. I mean, if you go to Google and you just type in dehumanization, you'll be taken to a rich literature of the history of warfare and how dehumanization plays a central role in preparing the psychology of the warring states to attack one another and to see other human beings as unworthy of protection and seriously unworthy of life. And so observing this in this present conflict, I decided that this was a subject that would be of interest to broad numbers of people, particularly those on the left. And I see this element of dehumanization tied to the demise of another principle, which I call universality. Universality, not just me. I mean, this is an idea that's has a very rich literature behind it as well, and that's the idea that all human beings possess equal dignity and worth and are entitled to equal rights, equal human rights, and equality under the law. So they go hand in hand, dehumanization of the enemy and the demise of universality. And if you look at the current conflict, you see it operating on both sides of the divide here, which makes what I write somewhat unpopular with people in both camps, which is just fine with me. When I teach law, I teach the rhetoric of legal discourse at USC. And when I do, I tell people that as they learn to write legal briefs or op-eds, to know their audience and to not be afraid to disappoint their audience. You're not a cheerleader. As a writer, you want to be a proponent of what you see as truthful. And one of the short videos I show to my class is a video by Tom Friedman, who's a New York Times columnist. And you may agree or disagree with his general politics, but the reason I show it to the class is that Tom Friedman remarks at one point in this lecture, I know that I've written a good op-ed when nobody really likes me for what I've said. So when I say to people on this country in the left that Hamas is a terror organization, that may get me some ruffled feathers there. And when I say that the right-wing government of Israel is a terrorist state, I get the equal and opposite reaction from people on that side of the divide. But I think this is something that needs to be said, and that I look at international law because I see that as a possibility for discussions that looked for common ground. If you look at what each side is saying in this conflict, they're each accusing the other of committing war crimes and what we call crimes against humanity. These are 2 separate categories in international law, as is genocide. They often overlap, but they're both saying that the other is guilty. So if they both adhere to these notions of international law, they are at least embracing it in some way, common ideals. And so I, as well as the chief prosecutor of the ICC, a man named Karim Khan, he's the new prosecutor, this is what he's saying, and I'm saying it on a much smaller scale. In times like this, we need international law and international legal principles more than ever, even if they seem farther away from being implemented. So I'm trying to get as many people as possible to think about those principles, and I explain some of those principles. I've been interested in international law since the middle 1980s when I went to The Hague and I covered the case of Nicaragua versus United States, and I met some of the international lawyers there. And since then, I've had a keen interest in the subject. And as the International Criminal Court was founded and these Gaza-Israel conflicts continue to arise, I've spoken with some of the administrators at the ICC about their procedures. And in the first article, I explain that there are these two basic permanent courts of international justice. There's what we call the World Court, the International Court of Justice, which hears disputes between nations. And since 2002, we've had a court called the International Criminal Court, which prosecutes individuals. I focused the second article primarily on the ICC, the International Criminal Court, because that is a court that does prosecute individuals. And the most recent person indicted by that court is Vladimir Putin. For a long time, this court was criticized as only going after African and third world dictators and perpetrators of atrocities. But now this court is really expanding, and it's flexing its muscles under a new prosecutor who's a British barrister. And the court is examining the current conflict between Israel and Palestine. Karim Khan was in Egypt at the Rafah crossing at the tip of Gaza, the southern tip, on October 29. And he gave a talk, and he said, both sides have to be on notice that we are looking at you and we are prepared to investigate you. And that's not a mere idle threat. Somebody like Vladimir Putin may be able to evade the jurisdiction of the ICC, but I don't think that the leaders and cabinet members of Israel will be very successful in doing that. Putin can go to China, he can go to North Korea, countries that don't recognize the jurisdiction of the ICC. But where do the Israeli leaders go, for example, or the Hamas leaders go? If they go to Western Europe, they're supposed to be arrested if they're indicted by the ICC. So as a legal person, naturally, I look to these international legal institutions. And as a person just interested in resolving this conflict, because I'm getting fed up with it, as you are. And I want to see some light at the end of a very dark and dangerous and deadly tunnel. And that's why I chose to write about these two topics, these two articles.
Yeah, on the dehumanization, you tell a very sad story about a group of Jewish prisoners in a Nazi concentration camp who questioned the commandant, why did you beat us? Why did you dehumanize us? Why did you strip us? Why did you starve us when you knew you were going to execute us? And the commandant says, I needed to make you less than human so my soldiers could kill you.
That's right.
And we hear that now. I mean, the leaders of Israel are calling Hamas, but Palestinians human animals. And I'm sure the Hamas have horrible names for Jews. And I know that from my days years ago in Vietnam, that some soldiers were encouraged to call the Vietnamese people, whether they were actual enemies or just civilians walking down the road, some derogatory name, and that was to make their lives less valuable, so it'd be easier to shoot them. And that's terribly sad. I mean, but it was a very important point, a good part of your article to me.
That's right. And one of the things I think we have to be on our guard against in the United States is domestic anti-Semitism and domestic Islamophobia, which are both spiking in the aftermath of the October 7 surprise attacks and, of course, Israel's retaliatory bombing campaign. And it's important to educate young people to understand that on the Israeli side, the Palestinian people are not the enemy. And on the other side, that the Jewish people are not the enemy. You have governments in control, and you have an organization, a militant terrorist organization in control, which doesn't represent the best interests of the common people on both sides of the divide. And then it's important for people to actively help young people get out of this trap of dehumanizing the other. And I think that that's our responsibility as elders in this movement, which is what we are, whether we want to see ourselves as that or not.
Sharon's always reminding me that I'm an elder in the movement.
Yeah.
So I wanted to thank you for introducing us to Professor James Waller and his organization, Facing History and Ourselves. And after publishing your article, then I looked further into some of the other videos that Professor Waller made. And a point that he makes when he talks about dehumanizing is the way that we distance ourselves from having blood on our hands. And as we were preparing today, and I was rereading your bio, I read again that you were a defense attorney for death row inmates. And so while the United States is really great at distancing itself from the awful things that it does, I think that this whole idea of dehumanization, it runs along a very broad continuum.
Well, yes, that's true. In the death penalty context, the prosecution presents the defendant as an animal, as a monster who deserves to be put down. So the job of the defense lawyer is to humanize the client so that you can tell the jury that if you return a death sentence, you're going to be, in effect, putting to death a fellow human being. So yes, the dehumanization is a concept that pervades all sorts of legal processes, but it's particularly active in the law of war. And I think a good place for people to become familiar with what's called international humanitarian law, which is the law of war, is by reading the Rome Statute of the ICC. There are many ways that you can try to understand the full breadth of international law. You can read the Geneva Conventions, you can read the UN Charter, you can read the UN Universal Declaration of Rights. You can read a whole panoply of documents, but one place where the collective wisdom of those documents is gathered is in the Rome Statute, which is the founding statute of the International Criminal Court. It is 65 pages long, but again, it's all in one place, and you can read how genocide is defined, how war crimes are defined, how crimes against humanity are defined, and how wars of aggression are defined. And there'll be some surprises for people who even who think that they're pretty sophisticated in the peace movement, but you'll learn a lot. I'll just give one example. People often confuse war crimes with crimes against humanity. They are separate categories of crimes under international law, although they overlap, and the same act can fall into each category. A war crime is a crime committed during an armed conflict, but a crime against humanity is a more recent concept under international law, which developed in the immediate post-Second World War period to deal with things like the Holocaust before there was international conflict, because the extermination of Jews within the German Empire, that within the Third Reich, was a crime. And so a different category had to be recognized, and that's the crime against humanity, which is a crime carried out pursuant to a plan or a scheme. And in the ICC, again, you're prosecuting individuals, but you would be prosecuting them for crimes against humanity. even during peacetime. And that's particularly important for Israel because even during quiet periods, if Israel is committing crimes, say in the West Bank, committing practices of apartheid, it can be held liable under the Rome Statute for violations of that aspect of international law called crimes against humanity. Now, this isn't in any way absolving Hamas from its various responsibilities, because to refer back to something we started with, which was Kamir Khan's October 29 press conference, when he took to task both Israel and Hamas, he made it clear that the October 7 atrocities committed by Hamas were subject to further investigation, clear war crimes. So they don't get off free on this. But again, both sides are claiming the other's committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. So they are implicitly saying we adhere to these principles and values at some level. So there is some common ground, some hope for that. And that's where I like to take people.
So I feel we're at a 9/11 moment. That horrible Tuesday morning, the buildings came down, 3,000 people died. It was an utter crime, an attack on America. And we were deeply saddened by it. And one of the first things we did is we sent 800 or so special forces, many of them on horseback, into the mountains of Afghanistan to track down Osama bin Laden. I thought that was a wonderful move. I hope they caught him soon. I'm sure they would have caught him in less than 20 years. But instead, we cranked up, our media got war fever, our leaders got war fever. We took a right turn, we invaded Iraq, the night of shock and awe. We sent divisions of Marines in Afghanistan, and look how horrible that left us. And here we are, our media and our mainstream media and many of our leaders are cranking up for Israel to flatten Gaza. And they have the military might to do that. They could,
thanks to the United States.
They could do that, but that's step one. And then what about the next 20 years? I mean, it's maybe trivial, but Yemen declared war on Israel recently. But what if the bigger Arab states around there who have been relatively peaceful with Israel? And I guess my question is, do you see any hope for any bit of sanity to intrude on this situation?
Well, this is what I wrote about. I think the bit of sanity comes from promoting and adhering to international law. I would like to pressure the United States to join the ICC. We helped create the ICC, as did Israel. But the United States pulled out even before the court convened, and Israel, I think, shortly after. So I think that that's something that should be added to any of the demands that the peace movement makes. But I think we have to be clear-eyed about what's going on as well. Personally, I don't see peace coming to Israel and the Palestinians until two things happen. One is that the right wing loses its control over the Israeli government. They're zealots and they're warmongers. And number two, Hamas has to go. Hamas is a terror organization which is not interested in the welfare of the Palestinian people. They won a parliamentary election in 2006. There hasn't been an election since then. It reminds you of something that happened in the Third Reich. There were elections, and then there were not elections after that. So I don't see how you achieve peace between those camps as long as they're led by their current factions. As far as the bigger picture goes, I don't know, Dick. I mean, I'm not particularly optimistic. But you asked for, is there a thread? This is what I have to offer. If other people have other threads, I'm happy to, read about them and consider them and all the rest. I just don't want the young folks on college campuses to become so driven by their passions that they start attacking one another. And that doesn't accomplish much of anything except create a situation where the authorities can step in and exercise even more power over everyone.
Absolutely. Well, we want to thank you for contributing your work to the LA Progressive. As bleak as the future looks, one thing the three of us know is that we can't give up. We
That's
can't
right.
say, oh well, there's nothing we can do here. There's always something that we can do. And if we give up, it certainly will get worse.
And everyone's involved. There's no escape from this.
That's right.
Yeah, it's great to be with you always.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much,
Bill.
Bill.
We love your
Thank
work.
you.
Yep, and we'll see you after a couple of more articles.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks.
take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.